I did want to, anyway, before we start the class, just thank everyone for all your prayers. My surgery went fine, recovering well. So anyway, I appreciate all the kind support. So thank you so much. Let's go ahead and get started with our prayers as usual. I need to have screen share set up, and then I can put those on. There we go. Wonderful. Thank you. Let's see. First, I've got to get to the right document. I think I've got it. Other things that I opened since I put these prayers up earlier today. Let's just recite this praise to Shakyamuni Buddha once. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. And we'll do the mandala offering. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then we'll do Refuge in Bodhicitta, first time in English, twice more in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknamba, jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi, daki chunyen gipe sonamgi, dola penche sangye druparsho. Sangye chodang soki choknamba, jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi, Daki Chunyan Gipe Sonamgi Dola Penshir Sangye Druparsho. Do a short meditation before we begin the class, focusing on the breath for the first few minutes in silence, and then I will lead you in a short reflection on bodhicitta, which is the topic that we left off with that we're going to be resuming tonight in the teachings. So we'll do a short meditation on that before we begin in order to set our motivation. So begin with a few minutes of watching the breath. So, as part of setting our motivation for tonight, let's do a brief meditation on equanimity. And we went through this meditation in the previous class because this is the preliminary to developing bodhicitta. And to begin with, let's just, from our own experience, even in the course of the past 24 hours, just look at your own mind in terms of how you observe particular people that fall into these three groups. The friends, the close ones that we quite naturally have some affection for and even attachment towards. And then the difficult people, when they appear on television or we run into them in our daily life, we naturally have an aversion arising because of the views they hold, the things they've done, who they are. And if we're honest with ourselves, we can see that our minds are not completely even minded and have equal regard for these beings in particular, because we tend to shut them out of so many of our positive thoughts and only hold negative views towards them. And then there are the countless strangers who, once more, if we're honest with ourselves, we can see how we more frequently have a mind of indifference towards them. If we think about them at all, we don't really have a great regard for their well being, their happiness, kind of pass right by them. These are the obstacles to having a mind that is embracing all beings with this even mindedness, this equal regard, seeing all of them through that same lens. And to undermine this, as we discussed last time, the main meditation is to think about the transitory nature of these relationships. We are basing these attitudes of attachment to friends, aversion towards enemies, indifference to strangers on the sole criterion of how they appear to us right now in this life. Not seeing that perhaps even in other moments of this life they were in a different category, but certainly when we consider countless lifetimes, there's nothing fixed about the role that these beings play towards us. Friends become enemies, enemies become friends, both become strangers, strangers become both of those. There's no solid ground upon which to have these attitudes. Rather, our heart should open to all of these beings equally. And as we'll discuss more tonight, the minds we want to generate towards them are loving kindness and compassion, a wish for them to be happy, a wish for them to be free from suffering, and moreover, the determination to do this for others, to help them to have what they seek. And of course, that leads into this altruistic intention, taking on that responsibility ourselves to help all of these beings, to free them from suffering, to place them in bliss. And to do this, we have to become enlightened ourselves. And this leads us to that mind of bodhicitta that is determined to become fully enlightened so we can help others to the greatest degree. And try to hold that awareness for our time together tonight so that everything we do, particularly as we investigate this topic of bodhicitta in more detail, that this becomes a cause to further our development towards that goal so we can help others to achieve the same goal as well. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes fully and we'll begin. Okay. So again, thank you for your understanding with having last week with no class, and we'll have next week off as well. But then when we resume, we'll have 3 classes in a row and complete this text. So we'll have a little more continuity then. But I'm sure everyone's got summer plans, which have you going on, so it's understandable. Let's get back into the text in terms of where we were using the slides that I put together. I might mention that I did modify these slides from what I distributed last time because I realized when I taught this for the center in Madrid, they were using a Spanish translation that went through the verses in the exact order. In our section on bodhicitta, as I'll point out, there is a kind of taking things a little bit out of the order that they are in the original verses. Whoops, so sorry, we're in this last section of the path of the superior person. Again, this is where we generate the motivation to become a Buddha for the sake of all beings, bodhicitta, and then go on to look at the bodhisattva's practices. So the development of bodhicitta, we went through that first part, the reason why we have to enter this path, and then began the 7 instructions of cause and effect, which start with equanimity, though equanimity can also be used as a preliminary for the other technique of equalizing and exchanging self and others. So my hope is to get through all of that tonight, all of these verses that pertain to developing bodhicitta. So again, we'll see when we go through the verses in order that there are some things that they kind of moved around a little bit. The translator of the text that in the traditional text in Tibetan, they are in a slightly different order. Last time we covered A and B here. A was how to achieve what our translator called even-mindedness. As I said, this is the preliminary for 7 instructions of cause and effect, but also we can use it as a preliminary for the other technique. We don't need to go through that again because we just meditated on that in brief. The first step in the 7, the 6 causes and the final effect of bodhicitta, is how to meditate on recognizing beings as one's mother. Again, I won't go through those verses again. This is said to be one of the most difficult topics to realize, but we can see the logic of it, that if we have had countless lifetimes, because the mind is beginningless, well, then every being has played that very intimate role with us, of being our kind, caring mother. And every time we've had a birth from a womb or birth from an egg, some being had to play that role. It's not, logical that that would have only been one being or a small group of beings. Instead, all sentient beings in this rotation of samsara would have been in that role at least once, if not many, many times. Again, when you start dealing with these numbers of countless lifetimes and infinite, infinite numbers, it becomes a little mind-boggling. But this is the logic behind it. We're not saying it's as if they were our mothers. It's the real thought that they were our mothers. That's why we frequently use that phrase, mother sentient beings. Try to hold that view. Again, for some people, as I mentioned last time, we might prefer to think about father sentient beings or sister sentient beings or brother sentient beings or grandmother sentient beings, however you want to work with this. But you want to choose something that really sparks that recognition of how much you relied upon a being in that role, not just again in this human life, but of course in many other lives that we've had in various other existences. So now we're going to go on to the next step, which is where we remember their kindness. And then again, this should say, I think I forgot to change it from last time, how to meditate on repaying their kindness. To actually do something to reciprocate from the kindness that we've shown. These 3 steps are generally talked about together because they're sort of the setup for how we then generate love and compassion towards these beings. I might just mention that, again, we did have, this was distributed kindly by Colleen to all of you, a little handout that goes through these steps that gives them all on a single sheet so you can use this in your meditation. The equalizing and exchanging self with others we'll come back to because it's not set out exactly and it's missing at least one of the points here, the equalizing self and others, and then there's a combined method. But this is like a good way to be able to work with this technique, or these 3 techniques essentially, the 2 separate ones and then the combined one. So let's go to our text. This is the second section of this pertaining, at least the second point, how to meditate on remembering the kindness of these beings when they were your mother. So the first 2 verses in this section are kind of talking about the kindness when we were in the womb. It says, how have they cherished me kindly, one may wonder. Well, my aged mother of this life, first for 9 or 10 months held me inside her, just as one holds a precious vessel up, most anxious, watchful, and careful not to harm me in all her postures, walking, lying, or sitting, not having just what she liked to eat or drink, but keeping to helpful things and eschewing the harmful. And we can think about all of the difficulties that our mothers went through when we were in the womb, those of you who have been mothers know that there's a great deal of uh, energy and kindness involved in taking care of a being who is in gestation in the womb, and making sure that when you finally get to birth that everything goes as best as can, due to your having taken care of yourself and thereby taking care of the baby that is growing within. So this is an important phase to remember, because I remember Venerable Rabin, I may have mentioned this last time, I don't recall. One person was asked, well, you may talk about the kindness of our mothers and so on, but my mother abandoned me at birth. And Venerable Rabina said, well, at least she didn't abort you, dear. And this is true, right? Nowadays, certainly, well, we're dealing with certainly threats to abortion rights in this country, but women can make a choice to abort a pregnancy if they so decide, if there are factors that lead them to that decision. It's already quite an amazing kindness that we were brought to term, that we were actually given birth to and have this human body, because our mothers endured that and certainly endured the actual pain of birth. So the first part of this is on the womb and what we experienced in terms of kindness while we were in the womb. Then the next stanza is about birth itself. Then, when she gave birth, afflicted by scarcely bearable suffering, yet she did not think of her suffering, but cherished me like a wish-granting jewel she'd found. Thus she was great in kindness at the beginning. So these two time frames of being in the womb up till birth and then actual birth, which is quite monumental. Um, certainly it's not an easy task for women to give birth, and it's a great kindness again for them to have done this for us as our mothers. Then we have kind of the paragraphs that deal with us in infancy, these stanzas from 324 up through 327. So I'm just going to read them and then talk about it briefly. These are not really horribly complicated ideas. It's just putting forward different ways that our mothers showed us kindness, particularly again in this human birth that we're using as an example. But obviously, there are many other forms of birth where we've depended upon mothers. After I was born, my hairs were bristly. I excreted my filth without being aware, and did not know in the least what was helpful or harmful, but with many efforts she brought me up. Also, to nourish my body, she made me drink milk. To keep my flesh warm, she wrapped me up in soft clothes. On her back when walking, her lap when sitting, she carried me. She gave me food with her tongue, wiped my nose with her mouth. Of course, this is from the point of view of being in Tibet and other parts of the world, and at that time, certainly where they didn't have Kleenexes and other things to, pamper our faces with when things were going on. So they would often use their own mouths and their own spittle to be able to clean us up and what have you. So again, this is just more examples from that time in infancy. Even my filth she cleaned up with her hands, saying, my child, she dandled me with her 10 fingers. I had to look up dandle because it sounded like it should have been dangled or something, but to dandle means to kind of rock or bounce, like the way that they bounce children on their laps. Mothers often do that. And it says, protected with loving mind, looked with affectionate eyes, called me by nice names, and welcomed me with a smile. She saved me from dangers like water, fire, and cliffs. She preferred to be sick herself than me be sick, and would rather have died herself than that, whoops, I'm sorry, than that I died. Acting thus from the heart, she was indeed most kind. So these periods in infancy, you can see again after birth, we're really quite vulnerable in this human existence. So much can happen to us that we need to be protected and taken care of. And that goes on for even some time into childhood, right? Until we're more or less close to adulthood or adults and can somewhat manage taking care of ourselves. But we're very dependent upon mothers at that stage. And this happens not just again in the human existence, but with many different species of mammals in particular that depend greatly upon their mothers during those early years. So this is something, again, if we didn't experience this as a human being in this life, there's no reason still why we can't infer that other beings have been that kind. Just this one lifetime, if we ended up with a mother who perhaps wasn't as caring and nurturing as we would have liked in those early years, well, so be it. But that's not the case for every single mother you've ever had. Most beings have shown you incredible kindness. And once more, if they hadn't done something to take care of you, you wouldn't be here right now. They at least made sure that you got enough food, that you had enough protection from the elements and illnesses and what have you, so that you didn't die. One thing I've shared in regard to my own mother, I think some of you were at the puja that was said for my mother the day after she passed away here at Tipta Norberling in Santa Fe, was that my mother, in the months after I died, I stopped, or after I was born, I'm getting my language mixed up here. The months after I was born, I developed pyloric stenosis, which is this fault in the pyloric valve on the other side of the stomach that keeps the food from going through to the small intestine. And so I was throwing up all of my food. My mother took me to the doctor and tried to get the doctor to figure out what was wrong with me, and the doctor couldn't figure it out, and she went home and she had Dr. Spock's book, um, to slow down my talking tonight. And many of us were raised from Dr. Spock's book that had this, all how to raise a child, and the caring for a baby and what have you, in the 50s and 60s. So my mother went to the book and she looked at sections around, what happens if your infant is vomiting. And she found that pyloric stenosis was sometimes a cause of that. And she took the book into the doctor and showed it to him and said, look, this is what I think Don has. He's got this condition, and that's why he's not keeping his food down. So my mother saved my life, a couple of months after she gave me life, essentially through birth. So, we all have different examples from our lives when our mothers played a pretty key role. And hopefully we have enough to work with from our memories of this life, or what we've inferred from the stories we've been told, to make that apply to our own dear mother of this life. And then we can, by extension, look at all beings having played that role equally, regardless, again, of whether we've had that experience of a perfect mother, which I don't even know if that exists. We can still have some appreciation for the variety of ways that they've been kind. So now we move into the period of childhood, after what we might call infancy, or when you're a toddler and really need to be attended to in a very caring way. And this is verses 328 and 329. Then, as gradually I grew older, she taught me to eat, to drink, to walk, to sit. When I was cold or hungry, she clothed or fed me. All her wealth which she'd gained with sin and suffering, she could not use herself, but gave to me, without regret. Thus she's very kind at the end, not only in this life, but also in many other lives has she protected me with such kindness. So again, this is to get to that place of acknowledging, particularly again from in the womb, through birth, through infancy, through childhood, the great care that our mothers give us, that can make us feel, again, incredibly indebted to them. And then kind of a summary to apply this to the fact that others have done this as well, because it's not just our mother of this life who's been kind in these various ways. Just as she has protected me with kindness, so all these sentient beings of the five classes also, in all the occasions when I've been human, have looked after me with such kindness again and again. It's kind of interesting. The five classes, when you do start talking about different classes of beings, some of them don't have birth by womb or egg. So I'm not sure that I really understand the reference to five and then human. We often talk about six classes of beings, the three lower ones, the two higher ones in human existence, and then, of course, human existence itself. So anyway, nonetheless, we can say that all these beings that have been in those, that are in those states now, have, on the occasion when we were human, played that role for us, and certainly also when we were in other states of existence where there were wombs or egg, birth by egg. At the times of my rebirths, born from the wombs or eggs of beings other than human, too, they have, in accordance with their understanding and ability, helped me and dispelled harms immeasurably. So again, you can use these verses in meditating on this. It's really quite effective to recall the various periods of your existence, from conception all the way through till you were more capable of caring for yourself, and even the way that mothers played a role in our lives beyond childhood. The things that they've done for us that have helped us uh, as adults, even in our lives, the care and attention they've given us, perhaps. So make this into a very rich meditation, but don't get stuck just on your mother of this life, and try to extend it with this idea of All beings, whenever we were born human or when we were born from the womb or an egg, we needed a being to play that role. And they showed us incredible kindness by doing that for us. Regardless of what existence we're talking about. Like I said last time, not all beings who are our mothers, I think I said this last time anyway, not all beings who are our mothers have that level of care or attention, but they have some level of care or attention that allowed us to be here, to have that existence. The next one is the repaying of the kindness, reciprocating due to having meditated on the incredible ways that beings have been kind. So this is, we'll start with, actually we'll do all three of the verses that are in this section. We move the screen up just a little bit more. Thus, these migrators have been extremely kind to me. If without repayment I abandon them, that is vile conduct towards my former mothers. Therefore, how should I not repay their kindness? Maybe it would be better to say, how could I not repay their kindness? How could I, neglect their welfare after they have been incredibly kind to me? Their minds crazed by the fierce great demon defilements, blind to the freedom path left by their friends and leaders, and reeling with misdeeds, they turn towards the abyss of the realms of woe. How could I forsake them so lost? So when we see the situation that beings are in particular, then we generate a thought to repay their kindness in much more profound ways, because beings need this sort of salvation that comes through the Buddha's teachings, an ability to attain the freedom from samsara and to actualize their full potential. So it ends with 334 saying, however, connection with samsaric happiness, my mothers have undergone many times before. Being deceptive, it can't really repay their kindness. So I shall set them in the bliss of liberation. What that verse is speaking to, we talked about this a little bit at the end of last week, 2 weeks ago when we met, was that we might think, well, I've repaid their kindness because I've been their mother countless times, right? Every single being, I must have been their mother. If every being's been our mother, well, then we've been every other being's mother. We might think, oh, I'll repay their kindness in much more temporal ways and just continue to deal with a samsaric way of repaying, kindness. But the idea is we want to go beyond that. We really want to think in terms of what is a much greater way to repay their kindness, especially now that we have met with the Dharma. That's the kind of impulse behind this, is to not just think, oh, every chance I get, I'll be nice to a sentient being because that way I'm repaying their kindness in some measure. Yes, be nice to sentient beings, be kind to them, but you want to repay their kindness in much more kind of far-reaching ways. Help them to achieve liberation, help them to achieve enlightenment. That's the way that we actually repay that kindness, given the situation that we're in, of having met with these teachings that are the answer, that are the way out. And why would we not give sentient beings that when we have that to offer? So now we get to a point where, as I said, the verses do get a little different here. And it's not yet in this section, but we are given some instruction here about ways that we could proceed from this moment. At this point, it says one may either continue with verses 335 to 341, which continues with the technique for developing loving kindness and compassion and so on in this methodology, the 7-point cause and effect method. Or if one prefers to meditate on bodhicitta by the method of exchanging, and generally it's called equalizing and exchanging self and others, then generate loving kindness and compassion using verses 342 to 348. Again, those are the verses that are sort of taken out of order to some degree, but not so important. We're going to work with them in the order that they are presented here. But for our benefit, what we're going to do now is carry on with the order that we have in front of us and go into the remaining steps of the 7-point cause and effect. Let me present them to you in the slides. So again, these were the first 3 after equanimity, even-mindedness. Then we have the 4th step, how to meditate on loving kindness and then compassion. Sometimes these are referred to as great love and great compassion, which are distinguished by not just the thoughts that beings have happiness or that they be free from suffering, but rather this sense of personal responsibility that I myself will place them in happiness. I will free them from suffering. So that's what we're going to meditate on next. And that's kind of, again, the response to having seen the kindness that others have shown us as our dear mothers and wishing to repay that kindness. Then the last two steps we'll see are generated as well when we get to the end of the equalizing and exchanging self and others. We have to still kind of advance that thought of great love and great compassion into what we call the superior intention or the altruistic intention, where we take personal responsibility for doing this at a much deeper level, thinking even if it is by myself alone, I will place all beings in happiness. I will free them all from suffering. And then, of course, we generate bodhicitta on that basis, coming to the conclusion that the only way for us to accomplish that is by becoming a Buddha for their sake. So we're going to go through the verses as they're presented here, and then we will come back and deal with the equalizing and exchanging self and others as sort of a separate little insert that could be used, as was indicated, as a second way of meditating on loving kindness and compassion. So let's talk about loving kindness. These are some very sweet verses on that. It says, also, although these old mothers want to be happy, mostly they don't understand that the cause is virtue. And even those who do don't practice it. While if they do try, it is useless because of defilement. So they speak to the inability for sentient beings to really get the happiness that they seek. First of all, not even understanding the causes of it. As we've looked at when we talked about karma, the cause of happiness is practicing virtue, engaging in virtuous deeds. And most beings don't even know that. And if they do know that, they still don't, practice it necessarily. They don't have the strength of virtue to carry them through creating the causes of happiness. And often that's because when they try, the defilements are too strong. So verse 336 says, therefore, since one does not meet uncreated karma, this was also one of the four general characteristics of karma that we saw. You cannot have the experience without having created the cause. Those in bad destinies always are poor in happiness, while even those well-born are lacking in genuine happiness, other than suffering that they perceive as happiness, which we saw in the teachings of the middle scope, where we recognize that even the transitory pleasures of samsara are not real happiness. So when we look at the situation that beings are in, they're really bereft of happiness. They have not yet been able to accomplish it. And many of them are in states where they are blocked to achieving true lasting happiness and peace. So then verse 337 is a bit like our verses sometimes that we meditate on when we do immeasurable love, measurable loving kindness. How wonderful, therefore, it would be if they were all endowed with the supreme bliss of omniscient Buddhas and its causes, the excellent paths. May they have these. Grant inspiration for this. So you might recall that often when we recite the four immeasurables, there are four thoughts. We have three of them mentioned here. It usually does start with that thought of how wonderful it would be if sentient beings had happiness. And here, the happiness that we are talking about is not just temporal well-being, it's the complete bliss of Buddhahood and all the causes that lead to that. So the first thought is how wonderful it would be if that were so. May that be so. And usually there's a third step that says, and I myself will do this. I will place them in happiness. That's again kind of making it great love. And then the fourth step in a prayer where we're doing this is to seek blessings of the Buddhas, of the holy beings, for us to be able to accomplish that. As it said here, grant inspiration for this, grant me blessing so I can actually accomplish this. So again, you could insert in there certainly any of the verses, the loving kindness verse from any of the ways that it's set out in different practices. But it's important to hold those kinds of thoughts, to really feel like you're generating loving kindness towards all beings. The instruction is usually given to start with the friends and the close ones in that group. Even though we've tried to develop even-mindedness, we're still going to feel our hearts open much easier with the people who we're close to. So start with that group and then work with enough of them so that you have the same attitude of loving kindness towards everyone in that group. Then you bring in the strangers and you start working with a few of them one at a time. And then when you get to a place where you feel like you have that mind for anyone who is a stranger to you, the same as you have it for your friends, then you go on to finally deal with the difficult people, where it will be some resistance because we don't tend to have loving kindness towards those beings in our daily life. As I pointed out in the meditation tonight, if we're really honest with ourselves, we see how quickly our thoughts go to something negative when we see just like I said, somebody in the news on TV that is somebody who we don't care for, a political figure or celebrity or whatever. Our minds go so easily to these negative tendencies. Even with a great practice of equanimity, we're still going to have some blocks to generating loving kindness and compassion towards beings who are in that category. So we work up to it. Start with the friends, go to the strangers, and then eventually to the difficult people. And then try to work with enough of the difficult people to where when any being you see, you will have that thought almost immediately. You know, oh, may this being have happiness and causes of happiness. I will help them to have that. It's very powerful. The next section is great compassion, which is the accompanying thought looking at the condition of the suffering of beings. As all of you know, compassion is something we're quite familiar with in all of our teachings. So it says then, likewise, although they none of them want to suffer, mostly they don't understand that the cause is non-virtue. If they do understand that, they don't avoid it. Or if they start to avoid it, they cannot succeed, again, because the delusions are quite strong. Because they act impurely, and since created karma is unavoidable, that was the fourth of the characteristics, right? If karma that is created is not wasted. Well, hell beings suffer from intense heat and cold. Pretas are greatly afflicted by hunger and thirst. Animals suffer from being killed, use, and stupidity. Sufferings of birth, aging, sickness, and death disturb humans. Asuras, demigods, are plagued by jealousy and fighting. Gods of the desire realm are grieved by sharp anguish near death. And then the form gods and formless ones have suffering of being conditioned. They all have some level of suffering still going on, or what we again might call dukkha, this dissatisfaction that plagues all beings in all realms in different ways. Some experiencing more pain than others, but all certainly in this conditioned dukkha, having to go from life to life under the control of their karma and delusions. So then the final verse in this section on compassion is again very similar to the immeasurable compassion verse that we have in many different practices. How wonderful, therefore, it would be if they were now free of all these sufferings and their causes, defilements, and the causes of defilements. May they be free of these. Grant such inspiration for this. Again, we would insert in our thinking, and I myself will free them from these. That's what, again, would make this great compassion. So these are meditated on exactly the same. This mind of compassion we develop in the stages, as was mentioned before. This is what Lama Tsongkhapa advises very clearly. Start with the people who it's easier to open our hearts to with compassion, then work with the strangers that are a little more difficult, and then the people who are offensive to us, that we have a very, very hard time, feeling compassion for their suffering. We might even be more used to feeling joy when they suffer, to see the things they have to go through. So, so this is how we work with those two steps as best as we can. Again, this is meant to be a practice that we engage in and keep doing until it feels quite natural, until we have that mind of great love or great compassion towards any being that appears to us, because there's no longer anything that would discriminate them from any other being, because we've become familiar with that attitude. So again, it takes a long time of working with these, I think, but it all starts with each day making a determination to meditate on these as best as we can, even if we're doing only in a very slight way, in a very brief way. Then again, what we're going to do is move forward where it says continue at verse 349, and we'll come back to this section where we look at how to meditate on exchanging self and others. 349 is this next step, number 6, the superior intention, or what is another word for it? They say like special intention, altruistic thought. This is that determination to do this by myself, to really be intent upon helping beings in the way that we've just meditated on with love and compassion. Not satisfied just with the prayer, thinking like that, may every sentient being be devoid of suffering and may they all have happiness. I myself must act to bring this about. That's because, again, we see that they have been our mother. We're going to take personal responsibility. That's why it says here, for this reason, as I must make my mother of this life happy and dispel her sufferings, so it is I who must act to dispel the suffering of all sentient beings and make them happy. And as we as we age, there should come with the sense of seeing the kindness of our own dear mother of this life, some sense of responsibility to repay that kindness as best as we can as our mothers age and deal with other difficulties in their life. Because now we're the one that's in a better position to care for them. You know? So this is the idea behind this, is that if all beings have been our mothers and we are now in the position to be able to benefit them, especially once more because we have met with the Dharma and we know how to solve their problems once and for all, well, then the responsibility rests on us because those beings have been kind to us. Now, this is, again, not denying that they've been kind to everyone who's gathered here today. So we can say that they've been kind to all of us, but the sense of personal responsibility needs to come from that, accepting that the beings have been in that role for you and demonstrated kindness towards you. So the responsibility of repaying that kindness rests on your shoulders. And we often even have that thought, even if it is by myself alone, even if I have to carry the full burden of all sentient beings, bringing them to enlightenment, which of course is impossible because we don't have the karma necessarily with all beings to be able to lead them all to enlightenment. And there are many other Buddhas who are dedicated to helping sentient beings in this way. But we have to have that kind of courageous, extraordinary thought that I will bear the burden of that. I will do that because these beings have been my mother. And I am now in the position of responsibility towards them. Then it says, verse 351, for from the side of the sentient beings, they're equal in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. This is actually the meditation that we would call the first step of equalizing self and others frequently. We'll talk about that when we go back to that second technique. While from my side, they are all equal in having been my mothers and kindly protected me, which again is the main thing that we're focusing on in this technique, to see all beings through that lens of every one of them being equal in having been our kind mothers. Therefore, I must shoulder the great burden of liberating all these sentient beings from all the troubles of samsara and even nirvana. Again, nirvana's trouble in the bodhisattva's perspective because it causes you to check out of samsara and to not be concerned about those you've left behind. You know, the solitary peace of nirvana is problematic. The nirvana that a bodhisattva attains as a Buddha isn't problematic because you're not abiding in that solitary peace. You're still engaged in the world. So you want to free all these beings from the troubles of samsara and nirvana and set them in the excellent state of omniscience. So this is a very important step too. I know sometimes we might gloss over that in our own meditations on bodhicitta and think, oh, I just generate some kind of random thought about, oh, and I'll do this for all these beings. But this is very important to really feel the enormity of that burden. It's huge. I mean, it's a bit of a messianic complex that we develop at this point of thinking, I am going to save all of these beings, even if it's by myself alone. But that's the level of courage and conviction that we need to have, that is determined to do whatever it takes for each and every being to be benefited in the way that we ideally want to repay their kindness, bringing them to enlightenment, freeing them from all their suffering, and so on. That, of course, leads to bodhicittas. We have a few verses that are contemplations on how we actually generate the thought of bodhicitta. This starts with verse 353 there. It says, but one wonders, since I am governed by deeds and defilements in my current state, and can't be sure where I'll even be reborn, how can I bear the great burden of freeing other sentient beings from samsara, setting them in the highest enlightenment? Not only do I lack such ability at present, even if I gained the state of a hir or pratyeka arhat, the arhants are the beings who have attained the state of nirvana, the complete peace. That is the goal of that path of the Hinayana practitioners. So even if we've attained that state, I'd never have the power to set all beings on the stage of omniscience. It's because, again, you've liberated yourself from your own afflictions, but you haven't removed the obscurations that keep you from being or keep you from being enlightened. You have to go and do that additional work. You have to practice the bodhisattva path and become a Buddha. So that's what's talked about in this next verse. Even these two lesser arhats, or sometimes it's translated as foe destroyers, have only abandoned obscurations of klesha, afflictions, not those to knowables nor to knowledge, omniscience. So their faults are only partially exhausted. Their virtues are but partially complete. So this little analysis in these three verses is to say, if you were to divert and go into the lower paths of the Hinayana, either the hearers or what are, again, the Sanskrit term is pratyeka Buddhas, it means solitary realizers. These are the two ways that the Buddha talked about beings progressing on the Hinayana path to attaining that state of foe destroyer. All that they remove, which is a pretty amazing accomplishment, don't get me wrong, I'm not belittling them in any way, but what they remove is simply the afflictive obscurations, the ignorance that is at the root of samsara, and all of the delusions that are based on that, and the seeds of those, which is pretty profound. They have liberated themselves from samsara by virtue of that and attained the state of foe destroyer. But they haven't even begun to touch what are called the knowledge obscurations or obscurations to omniscience. This is, I talked about them before, I'm sure, and many of you know this already, but these knowledge obscurations are very subtle imprints from having had ignorance since beginningless time. They give rise to a false appearance. In our minds, everything appears to be inherently existent. Even though we've removed the ignorance that grasps at that inherent existence, we haven't removed the false appearance and what gives rise to that. These are the subtle obscurations that are like blocking your omniscient mind from being manifest. They keep us bound still. Even though we've removed the ignorance that is grasping at all of that as real, that false appearance is real, is still there. So even these arhats who've achieved this incredible accomplishment are still blinded from achieving this complete complete knowing, omniscient mind. An omniscient mind is important to be able to benefit beings. We have to know their minds. We have to know their karma. We have to understand everything about them to be able to benefit them perfectly. That's why omniscience is so important. We're going to see that coming up in terms of the qualities of a Buddha's body, speech, and mind being the manifestation of this mind of bodhicitta, that this is when you're imbued with all of those qualities, then you can perfectly benefit others. That's the answer to all these preceding steps. Beings have been our mothers, they've shown us kindness, we want to repay the kindness, we generate the love and compassion, and the superior intention. The answer is, well, the only way to actualize all of that is to become a Buddha, because only in that state can I do the perfect work. As an arhat, I cannot do it. Foe destroyer just doesn't have that capacity, haven't yet done the work to be qualified to accomplish the welfare of beings. They haven't even accomplished their own welfare fully because they haven't removed all their own obscurations. So their minds aren't completely clear, for their own sake, much less for the sake of others. So then it says in verse 356, therefore, while their self-benefit is not complete, their benefit of others too is only helpful to limited beings, but lacks the power of benefiting every sentient being. Yes, arhats in their final life, after they've achieved that, may be of some benefit to others and help them, but then they exit from samsara and go into the solitary peace, where they won't be able to benefit others in that state. And as was said in that first line, their benefit to themselves, their self-welfare, isn't complete yet either. They haven't achieved their full potential. And it goes to, the question arises, well then, who does have the power to free all sentient beings from samsara's ocean? This ability only a Buddha has. No one else possesses it at all. Not only others benefit, none but a Buddha has perfect self-benefit, or, the fulfillment of one's own welfare. All the abandonments and realizations. Because again, the arhats have only achieved the abandonment of the afflictive obscurations and only realized up to that level. They haven't developed their realizations and removed the subtler obscurations. Therefore, whichever benefit I would win, truly I must gain that supreme rank. I have to accomplish Buddhahood in order to benefit others, in order to really do what the mind of bodhicitta is wanting us to accomplish, the welfare of all beings, as well as our own welfare, certainly, as is being pointed out here. So then we have the verses on the body, speech, and minds of the mind of the Buddha. Let's start with verse 359 on a body of a Buddha. If one gains enlightenment, one's body has these qualities. It's adorned with the marks and signs, what are called often the 80 marks and 32 signs. These are physical signs that appear on the body of a fully enlightened being that indicate all of what was accomplished on the learning path to become a Buddha, and never changing. It becomes something that you never degenerate from. It continues to abide in that state of a perfect body, unlike our bodies that are constantly changing, and able to manifest many displays of bodies before every sentient being all at once. This is the ability for the Buddhas to generate emanations that can go out to beings on the basis of their karma and what they are capable of being benefited by. And the Buddhas do this instantaneously. So they have it like a physical manifestation that is there for other beings as well, not just the body that is their own perfected body due to having completely clarified their own minds. So the bodies of Buddhas are remarkable in this ability, much more so than any other being. The speech, verse 360, the qualities of one's speech. Should every being ask things at once, it can, with a single sound, teach all those topics in each person's language. This tuneful speech, too, I often call it melodious speech, comes from all parts of the body. So Buddha isn't limited to just teaching through their mouths. They can teach through all of their body. They can teach perfectly to all beings in the language that they need with the exact teachings that they need. And there are said to be 64 qualities of the Buddha's melodious speech. I won't go into any more of those, but it's really worth meditating here too on. We want to achieve that so our speech can be perfect for others. Then verses 361 and 362 talk about the mind of a Buddha, both the ultimate awareness of not emptiness and so on, as well as the conventional understanding of everything that exists and the qualities that come from that. The mental qualities, while one's wisdom sees directly the mode of existence of every Dharma, in other words, emptiness, which we'll talk about in a few classes, it sees clearly every particular knowable thing, all the conventional phenomena as well. Just like something resting on the palm of one's hand. They often say like an olive resting in your hand, and it's right there in front of you. You can see every detail of it, but they can see this in regard to all things, all conventional phenomena. They know everything through that omniscient mind. Also, these other qualities, the qualities of one's love. It's taught that even the manner in which one mother loves her child will not be a match for even 100th part of the loving compassion one shows to all sentient beings. So when we talk about the qualities of the Buddha's, mind, the great love and great compassion that they have goes so far beyond even what a bodhisattva has, because it's this motivating force that has been generated over time on the learning path that is now fully manifested. One thing about a Buddha's mind is a Buddha doesn't have to think, have thoughts. It's not like a Buddha gets up every day and goes, what should I do today? Oh, some folks down in Missoula need some help. I'll go try doing something for them. Doesn't work that way. A Buddha is spontaneously appearing wherever there is the karma for beings to be benefited by that presence of the Buddha. And of course, appearing in physical forms and verbally giving whatever is needed to beings on the basis of the karma of beings. Now, why we might wonder, well, why don't I have that now? Why aren't Buddhists showing up at my doorstep, knocking on the door and saying, Don, I really need to talk to you. Well, have we generated that karma to have those kinds of appearances? This goes back to even what we talked about way at the beginning of this when we looked at the topic of devoting oneself to a spiritual friend. We have to create the causes for even those manifestations of Buddhas to be in our lives, spiritual guides that can lead us on our path. It's all up to us. From the side of the Buddhas, there's no fault. They aren't like absent and on vacation, often, Club Med for Buddhas or something. They are actually continuing to do everything from their side to benefit us. It's up to us to be in the best position to benefit from their presence. So this is, again, Buddhas don't have these thoughts. Their compassion is not a thought of, oh, I really should feel sorry and try to help these sentient beings because they're suffering. That is the very nature of their minds, always imbued with perfect compassion and perfect love for all beings. Now, from those the three doors, the body, speech, and mind, of course, come the actions of a Buddha, what we often call the enlightened activities. These are the next two verses. One's divine actions, never moving from the universal law One effortlessly appears in taming emanations, just as all wishes appear from wish granting gems or trees. Moreover, these appearances are not limited, sometimes occurring and sometimes not occurring. As long as any sentient beings remain, one appears with never a break in continuity. So again, we often use the example of Buddhas being like the sun shining in the sky, right? And right now, both in Missoula and here in Santa Fe, we are heading where we're going to not be in the rays of the sun any longer because the Earth is rotated enough to cause the sun to set. Well, there's times when we aren't in the direct rays of the sun. But it's up to us in our own position. Once more, the sun is always shining. It all has nothing to do with, oh, the sun's decided to stop, shining light on this side of the planet for a while. It's all with our position. It's the same with regard to the Buddhas, as I was just explaining. Why aren't we being benefited by Buddhas to the degree that Lama Tsongkhapa was, where he had these amazing emanations of his guru in the form of Manjushri, this youthful, brilliant orange being, with a flaming sword of wisdom and what have you? Well, because we haven't created the causes for that. But you can have that if you generate the requisite merit to have the Buddhas appear to you in that form. That's why, again, there are different manifestations, different emanations of the Buddha in line with the karma of beings. Lama Zopa once said, I may have even mentioned this when we were talking about gurus, but we should feel so fortunate that we have the Buddhas appearing to us in the form of human beings and not like dogs or something. Our dogs may be Buddhas, who knows? But the reality is that when a dog's barking at you, you can't really get any good dharma out of that, perhaps. I don't know. I think it'd be a little tough. So we have to, again, be very grateful for what we have created in terms of the ways that, the Dharma is kind of getting into our lives through the karma that we've created and so on. But recognize that it's up to us in terms of the ways in which others will be able to, these enlightened beings will be able to benefit us. It's entirely in our hands. Karma that we create determines the emanations and the appearances and the activities of these Buddhas. From their side, they're just there like the sun shining all the time. Uh, and not being kind of just discriminating between this part of the world and that part of the world. They're just simply um, going to continue to shine and send out their enlightened activities regardless. So, concluding verses on this idea of this final step, developing the mind of bodhicitta. How marvelous, thinking about all these amazing qualities of becoming a Buddha. If I win that supreme rank, I shall have such qualities myself and also be able perfectly to help all these sentient beings, my old mothers. I don't know why he uses old mothers. I think dear mothers would sound much better. But anyway, the idea is that these are beings who have been in our lives since beginning, as time as our mothers. So we have that relationship that is, I guess, beyond just the moment. So think of them old in that way. Therefore, with the very utmost speed, I must gain somehow that supreme rank, which perfects both benefits of oneself and of others. May I attain it. Please inspire me to do so. So this final step in developing bodhicitta, once more, isn't just something where we just say, oh, may I become a Buddha to benefit others then? We really should put some meat on the bones here. Like, think about, well, first of all, this is the only way we're going to be able to perfectly help others. Certainly, not even taking into consideration being an arhat, but as an unenlightened and unrealized being, we are very limited in what we can do for others. I may have pointed out in this class, I did it in one of the recent classes, and we can see so much of the suffering going on in Gaza right now. Just that little part of the world, that little strip of land there where there's unbelievable suffering. What can even I, as one individual, do to alleviate all of that suffering that's only suffering in the moment? Not talking about beginningless suffering and the suffering that they'll continue to experience lifetime after lifetime. In an unenlightened state, it's impossible for me to do anything to truly benefit others. Doesn't mean I shouldn't, give money to agencies that are helping over there, or if I feel so compelled and qualified, even go to places like that and do that type of work to alleviate suffering directly. But how will I help sentient beings beyond that? It's going to take much more in terms of qualities. And that's where we look at these qualities of body, speech, and mind, become very inspired about attaining that, and then the activities that will result on the basis of having all of that. and think that again, this is the way, this is the only way I'm going to be able to help others to that degree. And that's how I will not only achieve their welfare then by being dedicated to them, but I'll also achieve my own welfare. Because this is the culmination of our entire spiritual path. There's nothing beyond it. You attain Buddhahood, it's not like, oh, well, then now I've got to enter another path and become something greater than a Buddha. There's nothing greater than a Buddha. This is the culmination of our Buddha nature, our potential as sentient beings. So those two steps, we're going to see that we need to repeat them again at the end when we do equalizing and exchanging self and others. So let's go back in our text. Well, first, let me show you. I don't know if I have an outline for this. I don't think I do, because the outline, the points are in here, but they're I'll have to go through them in a kind of just verse by verse. Back to 342. Okay. So again, as was said before, you could certainly just jump to this if you wanted and skip over those first three steps that have to do with seeing sentient beings as your mother. I mentioned this earlier, but there is usually a part of this. It's called equalizing and exchanging self and others. The equalizing was in that brief little bit where we said we see sentient beings in terms of being the same as us and wanting to be happy, wanting to not suffer, and yet continuing to be bereft of happiness and continuing to suffer. And then we, after that equalizing, we do the exchange, and the steps in the exchange are set out in this. It says, since in this way all these migrating beings are none other than my own kind parents, if I abandon them in the wrong place and cherish myself, then this is not correct. This phrase, abandon them in the wrong place, the way I interpret that based on what is in the other translation that I have of this text, it means kind of if you kind of go in the wrong direction. If you don't hold the correct thoughts, the right thoughts that are appropriate, and instead hold the inappropriate thoughts, then you cherish yourself. This is the real enemy that we are trying to overcome in regard to this technique of equalizing and exchanging self and others. So let me talk a little bit about this mind of self-cherishing before we go into the verses. That first technique, the sevenfold cause and effect, is really about developing a sense of affection for others, seeing them in this very close role as your mother. Here we're trying to target this very pervasive mind that we have, which again we call self-cherishing, self-centeredness. I've taught on this a number of times for all of you. Like, that last course that we did on the Wheel of Sharp Weapons, that was one of the main targets that we were trying to annihilate with regard to all of the meditations and the verses in that text, was to really see that this is what's the most kind of direct cause of so much of our suffering. Master Shantideva says in verse 129, I think it is, of chapter 8 of Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, all the suffering there is in the world comes from wanting happiness for oneself alone. This is that self-centered mind that thinks that my welfare is more important than anyone else's. Even though we've equalized self and others by seeing that they all are just like us and wanting to be happy and not suffer, we still have a tendency to hold our needs as primary, as most important. And of course, we denigrate the needs of others and often neglect their welfare in the process of trying to get what we want. It's a very subtle mind sometimes, but it can be quite evident when we engage in non-virtue, when we actually take from others, steal their possessions, or we take their lives because we don't like the mosquitoes damaging our bodies with their little bites and what have you. We often do things that are solely focused on me, myself, and I, and what I need, and we might harm others in the process of getting that. This is the main target that this technique of equalizing and exchanging self and others is trying to get rid of. It's part of the Lojong teachings that we studied in the Wheel of Sharp Weapons. It's definitely a way of trying to remove this mind so that it doesn't become our default mode from the moment we get up to the moment we go to bed. I think I pointed out to you in that course, there's a wonderful video by Mipam Rinpoche, a song that he put together with lyrics that he has with a whole band and people, backup singers and what have you. It's called What About Me? You can go to YouTube and watch it. It's really quite an interesting video. This is the thought that we have most of our lives. What about me? What about me? From the moment we get up to the moment we go to bed. This is a real block to bodhicitta. Why? Because we need to reverse that attitude, exchange the concern we have for self with the concern we have for others. And that's what this whole meditation is about. So, this very next verse is that meditation briefly on the disadvantages of following the mind of cherishing ourselves. As Shantideva said, it causes all of our suffering. He says, in our text, it says, for it is this very cherishing of myself that has been the cause of all my own sufferings. And it can be seen that the cherishing of others is the cause of all my own happiness. So that's the next step. The first two lines are saying the disadvantages of cherishing oneself and the great advantages of cherishing others. Again, I've pointed this out to some of you before, but Lama Zopa Rinpoche would teach on this and go into great detail, all the various faults of the mind of self-cherishing, and then go into the great advantages of cherishing others. There's the book called Bodhisattva Attitude that you can get for free or very minimal donation from Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive. And he has a whole meditation in the back on all these various points. But it boils down to those two things. Master Shantideva again says, all the suffering there is in the world comes from wanting happiness for yourself alone. All the happiness there is in the world comes from wanting happiness for others. And we look at karmically, this is how it happens, right? If I'm stealing the possessions of others because I want them for myself, because I think it's more important that I have them than that others have them, well, that's cherishing myself, causing harm to others, making them suffer, and only creating the causes of my own suffering. So it's a lose-lose situation. Everyone suffers when we are following the mind of self-cherishing. I do because I create my own negative karma. They do because I end up stepping on them in the process of trying to get what I want. On the other hand, if I cherish others and I am generous and, kind and giving my resources freely to others, well, then they win in the moment by receiving those resources that will be a benefit to them. And I win karmically by creating the causes for my own well-being in the future. We know that from our study of karma, that generosity is the cause of having wealth and resources. So, in that very practical kind of conventional way, we can see that the mind that cherishes others produces happiness where it becomes a win-win situation. Others win by virtue of our treating them well, respecting them, being kind to them, generous to them. And we win because we create the karma for our own happiness and well-being. This is what we're actually seeking, right? That's why His Holiness often calls cherishing others as the way to be wisely selfish. If you really want to take care of yourself in the most genuine way, then you take care of others. It all makes sense when it's all laid out. This, nonetheless, we do have to work on diminishing this mind and cherishes ourselves, puts ourselves first, and replacing it with the mind that holds others to be dear. So this technique starts with, of course, examining these two minds and really seeing that we've got this very horrible mind that has been causing us and others so much suffering and problems from beginningless time. And we have this really wonderful mind that's the answer to alleviating the suffering of all the world and to helping all beings to have what they want. Helps us to achieve the happiness we seek temporally as well as ultimately by developing bodhicitta and so on. And cherishing others also helps others because they benefit in the moment and they will benefit in the long term by our being more compassionate and kind towards them. So again, you can do more meditations on this by going to Lama Zopa's book, Bodhisattva Attitude, but that's the gist of it in verse 343. So then we go on then to talk a little bit more about benefits of cherishing oneself. It says here, it's taught too that all samsaric and nirvanic happiness comes from wanting others to be happy, while all the troubles there are in samsara and nirvana come from wanting oneself to be happy. In short, because the childish cherish themselves, they are disturbed like this by waves of suffering. Because the sages practice cherishing others, have they not found the stage of perfect bliss? This is, I think, verse almost identical to verse 130, the very next verse in Master Shantideva's text, which essentially says, if I look at what the Buddhas did as bodhisattvas, how they changed their mind, reversed their cherishing self with cherishing others, and then I look at myself and the way that I continue to follow this horrible demon of self-cherishing, the difference is clear. We're the childish. They're the ones who have achieved the full culmination of their potential. Well, the choice is ours. Do you really want to continue to just create more and more complications for yourself and others in this world and in every existence? Or do you want to actually achieve this state where you will be able to benefit all others and bring them to happiness and, moreover, have the culmination of your own happiness and well being? It's very logical, as I said, still a lot of work we have to do to overcome these two minds. So this is, again, the section that deals with these steps of, like, maybe put that back on the screen. Again, in this format that I put together for all of you that Colleen sent out last time, it started with equalizing oneself and others, contemplating the shortcomings of self-cherishing, the advantages of cherishing others. So these two are the steps that we just looked at. Now we're going to go on to the actual thought to exchange self and others, and then Tong Len, taking and giving. And then we would end with the two steps that were there in the previous technique. So let's go to the verse that pertains to this determination, verse 346. Let me move it up a little bit. Therefore, if I never desire to suffer, I must reject this cherishing of myself. And if I desire insatiably to enjoy happiness, I must strive in the cherishing of others. Again, speaking very clearly to this being wisely selfish. If you really want to have your true happiness and well being, cherish others. If you don't want to suffer any longer, reject your self cherishing mind, turn away from it. So this is often called that determination to make the exchange, to say, okay, it's very clear to me the fruits of doing one versus the other. It's exactly, what I want to achieve is my happiness and freedom from suffering. Therefore, I have to abandon my self-cherishing and adopt the mind that cherishes others. Then verse 347 and 348 deal with taking and then giving. So may all these sufferings and all their causes of these beings, who are my ancient mothers, ripen upon me, so that they may all be liberated from suffering and its causes. This is the sort of thought that we generate in the taking part of Tonglen, which I'll talk about in a moment. Then the verse 348 on giving. May my collection of temporal and ultimate happiness and whatever virtue I possess all ripen upon these migrating sentient beings themselves, that they may all be endowed with supreme bliss. This is that mind. Pema Chodron often talks about how, like, we can see this is the exact opposite to how we generally live our lives, where we think, I'm going to take all the good stuff for myself, so I can have it and enjoy it and be blissed out in my own moment of time here. And I'm going to give the crappy stuff away and never want to have it in my lives and be perfectly fine if others have to deal with it because it's not my problem. Maybe we don't have it to that degree. Hopefully, we've been working on changing our mind, but we still see how there's some of that residual desire for our own stuff, for our own happiness, our own well-being. So we have to learn to reverse that thinking through taking the suffering of others and giving our happiness away to them. Pema Chodron points out how it really hinges on willingness. And we have to have that willingness to do this. It's a visualization and it is a meditation. But certainly, it should manifest eventually in forms of actual activities that we engage in, where when we see people who are unhoused on the street and seeking resources to help them to have food in their mouth and whatever, that we very quickly generate the mind that wishes to benefit them, to alleviate their suffering in some way, to help them to have some measure of happiness in their life. But it starts with the visualization and the willingness that we have, even in the space of sitting on our cushion, to engage in this practice of taking on their suffering, giving away our happiness. Now, I've talked about Tonglen on many occasions with most of you, if not all of you. But just to briefly review this, we can work with sentient beings once more in a very gradual way, just like we did with loving kindness and compassion in the previous meditation, the previous technique. We start with those people who are quite close to us. And with Tonglen, they often do even say, start with yourself, because it's a what a closed circuit or something. We're only working with our own suffering in the moment or our future suffering or whatever. We see ourselves objectively as a suffering sentient being to start with and recognize the ways that we are suffering and begin the practice of Tonglen there with ourselves as that object that we are looking at. And we're, taking more of that objective view of ourselves rather than the subjective view that we tend to have all the time. So we generate the thought towards ourselves, and then eventually towards friends, then towards strangers, then towards enemies. But we work initially with ourselves with the thought of how wonderful it would be if we didn't have to suffer in this way. If we were free of the pains of aging and the, you know, pains of being separated from those things that we love in our lives and what have you, how wonderful it would be if that were so. May it be so. I myself will cause it to be so. And we generate that wish to free ourselves from our suffering. And again, with ourselves in that objective view, we begin the process of taking away the suffering. You can use the breath, breathing in that suffering in the form of a thick, black, hot smoke that can be very uncomfortable, something that feels uncomfortable to you. And then at your heart center is your mind of self cherishing. You can visualize this as like a mass of rock or something very dense and hard at the center of your heart. And as you bring in that suffering with that willingness to experience it, you let it eat away at this mind of self cherishing. Now, again, some people say breathe it in one fell swoop and it completely annihilates the mind of self cherishing. If that works for you, that's great. I tend to do it in a very gradual way, just bringing in a little bit more suffering with each inhalation, bringing that down and letting it eat away a little bit more of my self cherishing. Then you eventually get to a place where you remove all the suffering. Again, if you're working with yourself, everything you're experiencing in the moment, all the future suffering you will have to experience all the way through the end of samsara for you, all of that suffering, you can breathe it all in and take it all away. And then you rest at that moment, knowing that you've gotten rid of your mind of self cherishing and you've gotten rid of the suffering of this being who is you yourself, in front of you. Then you go to the giving part, which is all about the loving kindness, seeing that although you've removed your suffering, you haven't yet placed yourself, your being, this being you're visualizing, that is you in your current state. You haven't placed yourself in that kind of apex of happiness, the complete bliss of Buddhahood. So you generate similar thoughts. How wonderful it would be if this being, myself, had happiness to that degree. May they have happiness to that degree. I myself will cause them to have that. And then you begin the process of giving. Again, for giving, Lama Zopa Rinpoche says your whole body becomes like a wish granting jewel, and you begin to send out this light that is everything that brings you happiness. And it becomes instantly what that being in front of you needs for temporal and then eventually ultimate happiness. Again, you work in a very similar way gradually, I find, is the best way, giving a little bit more of that light away each time. That is your merit, that is your body, your resources, everything you have that brings you happiness in your current life. You give that all away gladly, willingly. And eventually you get to a place where you give the last bit away, and that being in front of you, which again here in this way we're doing the meditation is yourself, becomes fully enlightened, becomes completely blissed out and happy. No longer any obstacles. So that's how you would work with yourself. And you just apply it after you work with yourself for a while in a very compassionate and kind way, not a selfish way. Just kind of seeing yourself as another sentient being who is suffering and who wants to be happy. Then you use that same format for working with the friends, the dear ones that your heart will probably quite easily open up to. And then you bring in some of the strangers until you can have that mind towards all of them. And then you bring in the difficult people. So Tonglen is practiced very similar again to these other techniques, to try to make it a very gradual process. As I said, Lama Tsongkhapa really emphasizes this. He says if you think in real general terms, which is nice to do every now and then, just think, oh, I'm going to take on the suffering of all beings, and you have this huge visualization of like countless beings, and you're breathing in all their suffering, all the suffering of the hell realms and the animal realms and the preta realms and the human and the god. You're taking it all in. That's kind of a nice meditation to do to really wake you up to the reality of the immensity of suffering in this world. But when you meet an individual being, Tsongkhapa says you're going to probably have some difficulty with them because you haven't worked with individuals. You're thinking in very generic terms of all sentient beings. But that's how we often generate these thoughts, it's very grandiose. Oh, all sentient beings. But then when that one sentient being that comes along that bothers you, you don't have that thought because you haven't generated it on that individual level. So Tonglen is important to practice in that way as well. So you engage in that, and then of course you go on, as is said. Let me pull up the text again. and it does give some instruction there. I think it does. This is how to meditate on loving kindness by way of giving away, Tong, and on compassion by taking over. Having done this, you continue with the superior intention, etc. That's why it's placed here in the way that our translator, Martin Wilson, put this together. Just know that these verses actually come after the bit on bodhicitta that we covered just a while ago. And Martin Wilson made the determination to move them in here so that they could be placed in a sequence where you could, alternate between the two, kind of moving into, I'm going to stay with the sevenfold cause and effect one, or I'm going to go into the exchanging self and others. So you would go on to meditate on superior intention, the verses that we covered for that, as well as bodhicitta. Let me just introduce you really briefly to the combined technique, which isn't, of course, exactly of what we have in this text, the way it's put together in Essential Nectar, but it's close. We develop equanimity. The next three steps are the first three of the sevenfold cause and effect. Seeing beings as your mother, remembering their kindness, wishing to repay that. Then the equalizing oneself and others, which again is a little absent in this, though there is that brief reference where we do think about beings being exactly like ourselves in very fundamental ways, wanting to be happy, wanting to not suffer, and so on. The contemplating the shortcomings and advantages and so on that we talked about, and that is just replicated for this combined technique. Then taking and giving are actually separated as two separate steps. And you can even do a bit of a meditation on compassion prior to that. It is advised, to kind of moisten your mind with compassion before taking away the suffering of others in that part of the Tonglen, and then giving away your happiness to others through the power of love, generating a sincere thought of loving kindness towards all beings, wanting them to be happy, and so on. Then the last two are the same steps we talked about, that superior intention and bodhicitta. So they are again repeated for all three of these in the last two steps, number 6 and 7. It works out for both of those. So let me see if there are any questions on what I covered, because this was a big chunk of verses, a lot we went through tonight. As I said, these aren't like super, super profound verses, but they are important to bring into our meditation. Sometimes I think we get a little abbreviated with these bodhicitta motivations and just kind of bring the thought up in a very simple way. But obviously the verses that have been put together by our author in regard to Essential Nectar, give us more, again, meat on the bones, more things to think about, to feed into those thoughts. So any questions or comments on what we talked about tonight? We don't have Ruth with us tonight. She's visiting her mother. And so maybe we don't get Ruth's wonderful questions. But nonetheless, are there other questions or comments people have? Sure, all of you have worked with these techniques before, so this isn't brand new material, but I do like his presentation. I find that these verses are really quite nice to reflect on, and takes a little more time, perhaps, in your meditation, but hey, what else do we have to do? Anyone?
We did it last week, Don.
Wonderful.
In meditation. This week
Great.
we had some beginners. So we did something a little different.
I see. Oh, great. Thanks for sharing that, Bill. And I guess you won't have it next Monday with people being out of town, right?
Yes, I think Melanie is doing a loving kindness meditation on Monday.
Wonderful.
So it may
Did you know,
be
did
along
you know
those
that,
lines. I'm
Melanie?
not sure I don't know what she has planned, but
Okay, good, wonderful.
when
Well,
I'm
I'm
not
glad.
around, usually Melanie leads. So
Wonderful. And then the following
Yes,
Monday.
I will. I will do it. Yes.
Good, wonderful. And then the following Monday.
sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
The following Monday will be the night before we meet again. So you can again do whatever seems appropriate with who's there. And but again, these are nice meditations to work with. Obviously, many of you again have done that already. So then in the next class, what we will do is move on to the activities of the Bodhisattva. I'm not going to talk much about them tonight because I think we have ample time. We have three remaining classes. So won't we meet on the 9th? We'll meet on the 16th, the 30th, and then, no, I'm sorry, 16th, the 23rd, and the 30th. 3 more nights, and we'll cover probably in the next one all the 6 perfections, maybe even a little bit of the perfection of concentration, and then perfection of wisdom, and or whatever remains from concentration, and then conclude with perfection of wisdom and a little bit about tantra. It might not be as clearly delineated with those 3 classes because they might overlap a little bit topic to topic, but I think again we've got ample time to go through all of these. So once more, I appreciate everyone's patience. I know the schedule was a little wonky in the middle here, but I'm glad we've been able to kind of keep it all together thanks to everyone's patience and understanding. So let me put on the screen for closing tonight before we do our dedication a little bit from Lama Yeshe. As His Holiness the Dalai Lama has said, if we are going to be selfish, at least be wisely selfish. So, I mean, if Lama Yeshe said it, boy, that means that His Holiness has been saying it for a while. I never knew where His Holiness originally said that phrase because it's not in the Lam Rim text per se in those words. But so Lama Yeshe continues, what he means by this is peculiar sounding advice, is that in a way, bodhicitta is like a huge selfish attitude. When we dedicate ourselves to others with loving kindness, we get back far more happiness than we could ever experience otherwise. I mean, if we, there's a wonderful way to convince our kind of tendency to be selfish to just step aside and let us, actually achieve our well-being through bodhicitta and cherishing others. Ordinarily, we get so little happiness and it is easily lost. So if we want to be as happy as possible, the only thing to do is to dedicate ourselves wholeheartedly to the welfare of others. Lama Zopa, in his book on bodhicitta, I don't have it handy here to refer to, but he talks in the very beginning about it's like we have this tendency in our culture to always want the best for ourselves, right? I want to make sure I get the best phone, and I want to make sure I get the best computer and the best house to live in and the best job and the best this. This is where if you really want the best for yourself, bodhicitta is the answer. That'll get you the best. That'll get you everything you're looking for, and in a much more lasting way than what any of these other things will. So if we want the best for ourselves, of course, also want the best for all beings, well, then bodhicitta is the answer. So anyway, hope you liked those few quotes, a few little passage from Lama Yeshe. Let's do our closing prayers as we usually do. First, dedicating for what we have done here tonight together with this mind of bodhicitta to produce the result that we seek, our own attainment of Buddhahood, so we can lead every single sentient being into that same state. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of the Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. And then bodhicitta, again, the main topic we looked at tonight. This verse is all about generating that aspiration, that it continue to grow more and more each day through our own familiarity with it and never decline, never diminish in any way, only grow stronger. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Maybe we'll add here before we go on to the prayers for our teachers. Zopa used to do this frequently in the retreats where he would, say at the end of this bodhicitta prayer, may bodhicitta be especially developed in the hearts of everyone in this country, especially, and he would say Donald Trump, especially Donald Trump. We can say especially any of our political leaders, especially anyone who's in a position of power in this world. May they be inspired to benefit others, to actually think of others first, and to diminish and decrease their own self-cherishing. And in that way, we'll all be better off if beings are acting from that place of genuine altruistic concern. Then to think about those who are already in that state, who we make prayers for so they can continue to be in this world. We're going to recite the verse for His Holiness's holy wishes to be fulfilled, for him to have good health and long life, and especially with his birthday coming up after his having done knee surgery here in the US, that things will continue so we can have him for many, many more birthdays, continue to be in this world, and the same for all of our precious gurus. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then we'll do the prayer specifically for Lama Zopa's reincarnation to return very quickly, very swiftly. Again, seeing that this will not just be a benefit to us who have a connection with him, but also a benefit to countless other beings in this world who will also benefit from his guiding presence. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss! Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of the reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. And let's conclude our dedications tonight with thinking about beings who we know or whose situation moves us, who are in suffering at this time. We all know individuals who are dealing with difficulty, obstacles in their lives, sorrow, sadness, illness, who are dying, who have died. Dedicate for those beings directly, as well as for those who are in parts of the world where there is unbelievable suffering, again, such as what is happening in Gaza right now, in many other parts of the world. Send this out in the same way that we do in Tonglen, like kind of giving all of our merit to these beings so they can be free from their suffering and they can find the peace that they seek. And may this be so for all beings through what we have done here tonight together. So again, His Holiness's birthday is this Saturday, July 6th. So it'd be nice if you can at least do some prayers, a bit of practice for him. It's important, as I said earlier in tonight's teaching, for us to create the causes for these beings to be here. They have no intention of leaving us. They have no intention of not reincarnating or anything. They are there as a resource for all time, for all beings. So we have to create the causes from our side. So again, if you can do something, many centers are offering practices. I don't know if you're doing anything there, but certainly there are many things available you can participate in the group, but also do some prayers on your own. So, all right. Thank you all for your help with organizing this and being here tonight, and Colleen and Bill for all the work you do, but everyone I know is quite involved in keeping Vessel Champagne going there. So I appreciate the opportunity to share the Dharma with all of you. So thank you for making that happen. Have a good 2 weeks, and I will see you soon. Okay, be well. Thank you again for all the kind prayers and thoughts. Appreciate it. Okay, blessings, everyone. Be well.
Thank you, Mom.
You're very welcome. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.